Hello, everybody. My name is Scott. Welcome to Optional Rule. I am the host for this show. I do a D&D theory crafting session and general tabletop theory crafting session, as well as a preparation stream for my weekly Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign. At least it's Rime of the Frostmaiden right now. So I love to connect with other players, DMs, or anybody interested in tabletop role-playing games in any way, shape, or form. And I use this stream every week to prepare for my game, get great ideas, think through my own ideas, and talk about some element that I think is really critically displayed in the coming week when it relates to my campaign. So thank you very much for joining me here. If you're joining me later on YouTube or Twitch, please welcome. Go ahead and leave a comment down on the tavern wall. I'd love to hear your thoughts for anything we talk about today, your experiences in your own game, and especially any advice that you might have. One of the reasons I really love talking about D&D and I love talking about role-playing games of all kinds is it's a sort of an evergreen hobby. I was just talking on Discord with some gamers last night about this, that I have been, excuse me, I hit my mic. I've been gaming for quite a long time. I've been gaming weirdly longer than I've been doing anything else in my entire life. I have been gaming 40 years, believe it or not. That's crazy to think about. But that doesn't. There's a perceived authority sometimes when people talk about length of gaming, as if it really mattered. And there's experiences and there's broad experiences, truths in that, the whole bit. And there's a perspective that older gamers can have, but it's really not the be all end all of gaming. And this is one of the things I love about talking to people in the gaming space, is that as an evergreen hobby, even anybody can bring a fresh perspective, a fresh way of looking at things, a new technique, a way to relate narratives in a more interesting way. When you're older, it's not always a good thing. You can sometimes get entrenched in thinking. You can sometimes be blind to previous ways of thinking. So, although I'm happy and I'm proud to be in this first generation of gamers, maybe second, depending on how you look at it. I wasn't not in the Gygax tier. I was in the 12-year-old, 10-year-old tier of person who first adopted D&D. But you know, that fact that you can do things again and again and again in role-playing games, and no matter how many times you do it, you can find a fresh perspective, you can find a something interesting, a twist on something that you maybe hadn't considered before. I just love that about tabletop gaming. I like people in general, to be honest. I enjoy engaging with people in the world, in my life, online, and in these streams. So anyway, that's I think that's super interesting, and that's why one of the reasons I do this stream. I'm very active on Twitter. You can find me on all the social medias under Optional Rule. Go ahead and give me a like, give me a follow. This stream is new. It's very small. I mean, not a lot of people have the endurance to sit down for an hour and listen to someone drone on about their D&D game. I get it. That's fine. But if you have joined me, I really do appreciate you being here. Love for you to say hi down in the chat. I love for you to ask any questions and add any observations you have as we sort of go along this stretch of what we're going to talk about today. So, what are we going to talk about today? I have the 7th session coming up of my Rime of the Frostmaiden game, and an overwhelming topic that I have to work out here is session balance. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about how I think about session balance, how I think about the factors that bring in what make an encounter both exciting and challenging, but don't overwhelm the players. These are all sort of important factors for DMs. And I think this is the 5th edition in D&D is one of the harder editions to do that in. Ironically, I wouldn't have thought that maybe a few years ago, but just running it D&D 5th edition for a number of reasons I'll get into, I think it's harder to balance encounters in 5th edition. And we see that difficulty playing out in system design more frequently than we give it credit for. People complain a lot now. Sometimes people can have some commentary. They're very opinionated about Rime and the Frostmaiden. I think it's a great module. Personally, I've explained before the reason why I think it's a great module is you do have to do a lot of work for it. That's why I think it makes a great module to run now, but also to live stream about, because all of the work I have to put in to modify the things that I think need modifying is a great way to talk through game theory and display sort of DMing techniques that I hope you can use in your game. But the reason why I like it is all this work that I'm doing, I probably would have done even if it was a perfect module. So that's why I like it. I think it's got great insight and great takes on encounters, but they need a lot of rebalancing. And probably the biggest critique Rime and the Frostmaiden is given is unbalanced encounters, which, you know, you don't want to go in blind to. I don't think it's bad, but you want to be informed in your choices as the DM on the encounters you're bringing your party into. So a couple things I want to start out with. Rime and the Frostmaiden, spoilers galore for this module in Rime and the Frostmaiden. So if you don't want to get that module spoiled, this is not the stream for you, because I'm going to talk about all the things that that lay down what I think need to be rebalanced in the upcoming encounter. If you're in my campaign, please don't see the stream until much later. You can probably safely view the stream probably a month after our session. It's currently the 14th of November. And I apologize if you hear background worrying. It's fall here in the United States if you're overseas watching it. So we have all these leaves changing and leaves falling. I'm in a state where that's very common. So all my neighbors are blowing their leaves. So apologize. That's where we are. All right. So balance. Balance is hard to achieve in D&D 5th edition more than others because everything is so dependent on what's called the action economy in D&D, which means basically how much damage can you do, how many actions can you take to do enough damage? Can you invalidate somebody's action to invalidate the damage that they might do that round, blah, blah, blah. So how much damage can be dealt out by the player party per round versus how much damage can be dealt out by the NPCs per round. The DPS is a common concept in all gaming, so I'm not going to get into that. But the critical problem and a mismatch sometimes in D&D games is that D&D often likes to have a single big bad guy encounter. No matter how people tell you not to, how many times people tell you not to do that, there's this temptation. I do it, everybody does it. There's this broad temptation to create this single epic combat that sort of everybody expends all of their resources, and it's alpha strike kind of thing where they're all in and the stakes are 100%. It's very high on this big encounter, and that's because you run D&D encounters. And one of the mismatches in 5th edition is there's this, I forget where it was written, but I think it's DMG, but there's this assumption that every rest period, every long rest in D&D where you recoup your spells and so forth, that has like 6 to 8 encounters, I think is the number in it, that you go through 6 to 8 encounters and then you do a long rest. And people will always push back when I say this, but that is profoundly impractical in D&D. 6 to 8 encounters, because encounters don't have, D&D is not played out over the period of a long rest. D&D is played at a session, a 2 to 4 hour session, or however long your session runs, where players come either online or to your house or wherever, and play out that time. And 6 to 8 encounters is just, in my opinion, impractical. I know it's the internet, so anybody can come forward and they can talk about how they do it all the time. I have never seen it in all of my D&D experience. 6 to 8 encounters in a 2 to 4 hour session is just impractical. It doesn't happen. So 2 to 3, maybe 3 at maximum. 2 is a pretty good number, and oftentimes 1 is an encounter. And I know encounter doesn't have to be combat; it can be role playing. It just uses resources. I mean, encounter just means, in this context, something that consumes resources from the party. But still, the number of encounters that you're going to have per session is pretty low. So if you stuck by that, let's say you had 2 or 3 encounters per session, and you stuck to that paradigm of 6 to 8 encounters before a long rest, it would be 4 sessions before a party had a long rest. That's absurd. That's crazy. That if you played every week, once a month, players would have a long rest. That's bananas. So I would promote. I really think, I really think we should just dump that thinking and that assumption, because it's bad pacing wise. Players don't want to deal with that often, and it's a buzzkill to go that way. Hey, Root of All Beers, it's great to have you here. Thank you very much for participating. They say, but you can multiple session between long rest. I'm not sure. But but it's more practical 4 to 6 encounters between long rest. I don't know if it's practical. I still, so my position, it isn't. I don't think at the table that that's common. And I think that you can multiple session between long rests. I'm not sure what you're getting there, but I think that long rests are good pacing. How many times are players expending resources? I think in an ideal world, they would expend their resources in a single play session, then maybe rest to the next session, or maybe have multiple rest sessions in a single session. But that would imply you get to 6 to 8 encounters. That's just not working. So. Yeah, and I'll present you the evidence of that statement is that if you look at module design, and this is increasingly happening across official modules. If you look at module design, really it's picked up since Lost Mines of Phandelver, last couple of years. Encounter after encounter after encounter is overbalanced on CRs. It's very common right now for first level parties to be facing CR3 creatures, single CR3 creatures. If there were multiple, you'd be absolutely killed. And that's I'm not going to get into whether I think that's good or bad, because I think it's good or bad is not the way you paint things in D&D. It's, does it fit with your style of running? That's the only thing. It's intended, so root of all beers, it's intended to have 2 short rests before going to a long rest. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think, there's only so many hit die you can expend on a short rest, no matter how many you take. So I think that's a rate limiter for the number of short rests. But sure, you can do a number. But short rests themselves, it's not practical always in a dungeon. I mean, you can't just take an hour off in the middle of an intense dungeon and expect that the NPCs wouldn't be doing anything. Actually, I should back up. I don't think that. Other players just sort of other DMs put the world on hold and let that happen. That's a valid style. I don't do that. I like a living, breathing world. But yeah, I think, so back to the data. The data shows that increasingly designers are pushing these hard CRs. I think, even back in the Essentials kit, the Dragon of Icespire Peak, there's a first level party is facing off a 3rd level Manticore. A 4th level party is going against the boss in that, which is a white dragon, CR6 creature at level 4. It's an easy encounter, actually. You can blow through that dragon in that encounter. But they set up frequently now, very, very frequently, these big CR creatures against lower level parties. That's happening. So let's talk about balance and the things you want to consider of where this is going, because that's a meat of what I want to try to do today and get across, and what things you have to consider. The encounter calculator, I think everybody finds this marginally useful, which is what it's intended to be, by the way. That's working as intended. It's not supposed to be a be-all, end-all like it was in 3rd edition. It's just supposed to be a general guide of, are you painting within the lines or coloring way outside of it, because there's so many factors that go into what makes an encounter dangerous versus not dangerous. And the first thing I want to add, a great example last session of, it was 2 sessions ago now, actually, I'm sorry, of a dangerous encounter versus not dangerous encounter. One of the big, lots of critique again around Rime of the Frostmaiden, much of which I don't think is deserved, but one of the comments often is there's a scenario called Cold Hearted Killer. And in that, there's a CR3 undead creature that's supposed to face off against the party. You can choose where you want that to happen. I chose at 2nd level. Some people think it's meant to be happening at 1st level, but I don't know. But I can tell you the reason why I chose 2nd is because 1st level is bananas for me. No matter how many people come to me and tell me I ran a simulated combat and my party did survive, it was a hard fight, but they survived. That's fine. That's not what I'm worried about. There's a couple of things you need to balance. First is how much damage output an NPC does to the party. So as such, I want to show you a great resource that I use to do 2 things. There's a normal damage output, and are they likely to take down the party? And then there's burst damage output. And I'll talk about those separately for a good reason. So first, this tool. This is by Sly Flourish. If you don't follow Sly, he's got a great stream. Every Sunday he streams his own D&D prep session. I use his technique here. Actually, this is his site. He's got a great table that gives you the player, the level of a player, and the average hit points that they have, their 25% hit points and so forth, that the average level that they have within the party at the time. So at 1st level, 25% of players have 8 hit points. At 50% have 10, 75% have 13 or more. And they do a standard of like 2 damage or something like that. So this is a great rough guide. And why you need that guide is you want to get an idea of how much damage output a monster does or a group of monster does, and how likely that is to burn through a party's hit points. Now, there's two ways you can do it. One, you can calculate your damage per second. That's a hard thing to do in D&D, but I don't want to dress it up. People have lots of calculations because they think D&D is a video game. It's way more swingy than that. You have all these factors that go into swinging damage, but the way you just calculate it is what percentage chance do you have to hit a certain armor class, and what's your damage output, and times it by that percentage, because that's the average over time how much damage you're going to do per round. So if you have a 50% chance if you're AC 10, you have 50% chance to hit an AC 10, let's say, without bonuses. You do 6 points of damage with your weapon on average a round. That means your average damage per round is about 3, because some rounds you'll miss, some rounds you'll hit, and so you'll see that damage per round goes down the higher the AC goes, and there's a balancing factor here. But I'm not trying to turn this into a math exercise. You want to look at that for the party and think as a general estimate, how long might it take them to take out a certain monster? So that's the first. How long is a monster going to be around to deliver damage to the party? And then do the same thing for the monster. How many attacks do they get? How much average damage do they have? What's the burn rate on parties for that? And look at it. And you start making judgment calls as the DM. This is why I'm not bothering with an equation here. I want to give you a general rule of thumb to look at things. Start at the DM. Are you distributing that damage out amongst the party? Are you doing it like a single target per round until they fall? Then you move. That's a thing that DMs have to decide on their own. The thing you're often faced with, and I'll actually get to a very good example of this in the upcoming module, is how much do I be kind to the players with the tactics the monster is choosing versus how much should they just play based on their optimal play style versus how much would that NPC realize that that's a tactic. There's all these things you have to balance, and in the midst of that, you don't want to shatter the illusion for the players that this is a world playing out on its own. If you overstep, if you over optimize in favor of the players, you're shattering the illusion. You're telling the players, "Hey, I'm letting you win this." Spoiler alert. DMs are always letting the players win because we design adventures to be beat. We don't design adventures to kill the players. But you do run that risk of shattering the illusion for the players that this is a difficult challenge for them, and you're taking away what should be a well-earned victory, opportunity for a well-earned victory. If you overdo it, if you over-focus on tactics, the truth is you'll straight up kill a party, because DMs have no problems killing a party. We can have a dragon drop out of the sky or a meteorite or whatever. We can kill a party with a thought. So that's. I don't know why people are obsessed with that. We want to hit that right balance where the players are really stretching their skills. They have earned it. They've legitimately earned it. You would have legitimately killed them as a DM if they shirked off their responsibilities or make bad choices or something. But you're not trying to kill them. You have to walk that very, very thin line as a DM. So one of the ways you look at the damage output by the monster and the damage output for the player. Now let me discuss burst damage, and this is an example of why there's a legitimate concern over the balance in a lot of modules. That burst damage means how much damage at maximum can a NPC do to a player. And this is where these overcharged CRs really get dangerous in the context of current module design in D&D. Sepulchro, who is this undead CR3 creature. Matter of fact, let me find him over on Cephek. I should be able to find him here. Yeah, so Sepulchro, this is an NPC that my players fought and killed, but barely 2 sessions ago. They literally were down to the last 4 hit points of the last standing player when they took him out, and they didn't even take him out because I set up this other MacGuffin where if they took out the person who actually bound his spirit to the undead creature, that he would fall. So they his damage output here is 7 plus 8 on average, right? But it's all dice based. So it's a D8 plus a D10 plus cold damage, 2D4. On the first round of combat in my session, the barbarian character rages, charges at Cephek, who actually had taken a ready action. He hid behind a pillar, and he was just going to baseball bat the first thing that came around the corner, which is exactly what happened. The barbarian rages, comes around the corner, catches this ice longsword straight in the face. It was a crit damage. So now I'm doubling all of these dice on this character. So I did 2d8 plus 2d10 plus 4d4. I rolled pretty well. It was something like 30 points of damage in a single shot to this player character who I think has very high hit points, but something like 29 or 28 hit points at the time. Bam! They go down in a single shot. The highest hit point character takes them out. That changes the calculation of combat. So when we talk about swinginess, that's what I'm talking about. And let's talk about balance for a second and why you have to understand, keep in mind average hit points versus both average damage of an NPC, but maximum damage. Because there is a rule in D&D, and this is not an optional rule, I don't believe. It's the rule of D&D of overwhelming damage or something like that. If you take in a single attack damage that sends you negative an amount equal to your maximum hit points, you're dead, period. Cut your head off, whatever. You don't get a saving throw. You don't get death saves. You are just dead. So let's look at the average hit points for NPCs here. If I do 30 points of damage to almost any first level character, it would kill them immediately. That's not a great design. And the DM is stuck in this position of, do I ignore the critical? I roll all my rolls in the open. That's not a great design. I think that really puts DMs in a bad position. So when you're balancing encounters, you really need to consider this burst damage. So it's not as important to NPCs as it is to players, but it's very important to consider. So anyway, that's something to consider. That's first set of tools you can use. The other is you need to start, and that's just straight out weapon damage. That's not special abilities. That's not sneak attack damage. That's not burst damage from spells. There's a whole bunch of other things to start considering. And so I'm going to get into the latest and upcoming session for our Rime of the Frostmaiden. And maybe I won't do the session prep, but I just want to give that as a poke for a second. I use Sly Flourish's Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master's prep technique. So many people use this. They get a lot out of it. I recommend it. Google that. You'll find tons about it. Go ahead and buy Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master. I highly recommend it. It is a great book. And I think that you can get a lot out of it. Hey, Killaroo42, welcome. It's great to have you in the stream. One way to combat the swing from dice is to generally use the average. That's unless a crit. That's a great point. That's a great point. I actually always use average. I think so I almost always use average. I often use average, but on since I have a virtual tabletop, it's become so easy to roll. I've actually started rolling, and maybe I should use average, but I like it because there's an excitement about dice rolling. It's a craps game, right? And players can see it. I use Foundry Virtual Tabletop. That's what you keep seeing when I switch back over to here. I use Dice So Nice, which is this. If you roll dice in this, it has this great little 3D. You probably can't see that animation, but it just rolls dice very easily and nicely, and all the players can see it. And so it shares this tabletop experience of being able to see it. So I think I've read it, but let's look at average damage. Now, this is where critical damage gets hard to calculate if you use averages, and that's why Killaroo is saying unless criticals, because you only double the dice, you don't double the bonus. So typically, I do normal damage, just average damage on a normal hit, but I usually roll criticals because one, it makes it more exciting, but two, I just don't want to have to do all the math of, well, only double the dice in the average, but not the bonuses. So I end up rolling it. But even if we did average, so what would the average here? So this is a 4.5. So 5 is the average plus a 6. So that's 11 plus 2 each. Because it's 2.5, so 3 each for the D4, so that's another 6. So what did I say? 5, 6, 11 plus another 6, 17. That's bananas already. Yeah, I think I probably have that off. But so the damage I rolled is probably not that great a damage. So still, you're killing outright a first level character. And if I'm rolling, you're well within. Let's look at this average hit point again. Average hit points, 75% of characters have 21 hit points or above at second level. If you look at, can I do 42 points of damage in a single hit? I could if I rolled it. So I'm still within, unlikely, but still within the possibility that I might kill somebody outright. I don't think that's I really don't like that personally as a DM. But here's a balance. Here's a DM technique, and one piece of advice here: if you do make that part of your counter design, don't bury it. Don't hide that fact. Use that to set the stakes of the encounter. I don't know how to do that very effectively, so I don't often do it. But if you have something at stake where if this happens, you are dead outright, player, tell them. Tell them up front. This guy looks like he has the capability to take you out in a single swing. And not only take you out, but kill you. So set the stakes of this combat. Let them know up front, this combat could kill you in a single swing. That might make the players behave differently. They might react negatively to that. You need to know your players because some players get very offended at poor balance. But it's something to think about. But if you're going to do that as a DM, do not go into that blind. By the way, it's my mug today is hustle until your haters ask if you're hiring. I love these motivational mugs. I say same things for DMs. I love to see games run. Please go out and run a game. Do your game. Create something. Don't let people tear you down and discourage you from creating things. Just create it. People are always going to say something negative to you. Just get out there and do it. Whatever. This is not good enough balance. This is not whatever. You're too old to do a stream. Screw those guys. So in the gaming concept, run games so good. Let your hater until your haters ask if you have an opening in the game. That's what I would say. All right. So that's just straight up hit points in terms of balancing. So you need to look at burst damage. You need to look at average damage and start realizing how fast a player is going to go through. Then we start running into average hit points and special abilities on top of all this. And I do have to say this is going to be if one of my players happen to be looking into this, and I hope you're not, I'm going to start talking about our upcoming session. So I am coming up. Let's give you quickly the setup. I use something called Notion SO for all of my player notes. Where the session was last time is caught in the middle of a food riot in Bryn Shander. The players instigated by a member of the Charterland Syndicate, who's a plot line I added for the Zentarum, basically trying to undermine the 10 towns. The players have contacted the city speaker. They met with to go meet with an alchemist north of Bremen. So they've gone to see this alchemist north in the north. It's a great Luxodon character who wants them to recover this vital thing called the Prism of Saloon, they're a fish breeder. They're an alchemist fish breeder, and with this prism they can breed knucklehead trout fast enough to feed the people of the 10 towns, at least somewhat, and alleviate some of the starvation that's going on in this module. So this hag has stolen the Prism of Saloon, and the players want them to this NPC wants the players to go recover it. Now, this is a setup for a module. I'm just modifying it here. In here called the Cauldron Cave. There we go. So it's a great module, actually. I can go ahead and, well, it's probably worthless to see the map itself, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. So this is a face-off against the hag. There's a hag, a will-o'-the-wisp. There's a frost giant skeleton, and there's a water weird. Now I'm going to talk about the balance of sort of each one of these because there's some balance. I won't say issues, but there are some balance things any DM really needs to be aware of when they get here. So actually, let me activate this. Activate. All right. So this cauldron of whatever it's called here. So the players get here. There's a couple of innocent encounters, like in this area where I'm mousing over. There's a dire wolf. Not much to be terribly concerned about there. Let me go to dire wolf here. Dire wolf, and use what I just said. You want to start looking at. So the dire wolf maximum we could do is 2d6. 46 on a critical. Not that big of a deal, right? They're not going to take a player out in a single shot. 37 hit points. The players are probably going to burn through that. The burn rate of the player damage, they'll probably go through it in a single round, maybe 2 rounds. Really, it's just going to nip at them, take a couple resources, and let them role play a little bit. The players get over here. This is a water weird. That's a great situation where balance you have to consider against sort of what environment a player is going to be in. A water weird, I created this one shot. If you saw a couple of weeks ago, I did a one shot adventure creation around Phantom of the Opera, and I used a water weird in that, where the players had to go into this cistern, swim down to the bottom to get to a passage for the Shadowfell. And in the midst of swimming down, they get attacked by a water weird. Now there's a whole, it's invisible in water, so they're disadvantaged at hitting it. They have to worry about drowning, so it depends on their constitution. That's a great example of, it's not just about hit points now. It's about exhaustion levels. It's about running out of breath, where you go automatically to 0 hit points. That's the rule for drowning. If you go into a drowning state, you just go to 0 hit points, no matter what your hit points are. And there's a couple of abilities in this game that cause that. And in this encounter, there's an ability that causes that, and it's paired with something called the Will-o'-the-Wisp. And I'm going to get to that, about how that has nothing to do with hit points. That has to do with how abilities interact, and you should be very concerned about this as the DM. And I'm going to give you some advice on what you might be able to do about that. So anyway, the water weird. You get here, you crack the ice, it comes out, it attacks you. They're not underwater, so it's not a concerning encounter. But this is a great environmental encounter, because really, if the players fall off of this bridge, they slide down this ice slide, come crashing down at the bottom of the falls. They cause a crack in the ice, and the water weird comes out. So what's the balance problem? The balance problem is, you might have one player facing off against this water weird alone. That is a vastly different scenario. Water weird. Hope I'm pronouncing. Oh, I didn't. I got the E. I always get the E and water weird wrong. So water weird. What is it? CR3 creature. They're a third level party now. A single CR3 creature against a single third level player. That's probably a deadly encounter. And this is where design, and you have to balance a number of things as the DM, because let's just take pure role playing. If you had a very intensely role playing party, which I do, a player falls off this bridge, slides down around this corner. This is all dark, so they can't see it. Disappears around the corner, falls at the bottom of this fall, and gets into a fight with the water weird. The rest of the party may not have come down that. They may not have fallen. They may choose to say, hey, they'll catch up, and they move on. So there is no way to know if this player gets to the end of this fall and gets into a fight with this water weird and find out if they're alone. This is where we get into levers and buttons that the GM has at their disposal to adjust an encounter without it being obvious to the players. One of the things you can balance an encounter with as the DM is just straight up making different decisions. If you get into a party that I hadn't anticipated that there'll be one player facing off against this water weird, you don't have to do that encounter. If they haven't seen that water weird, there's no reason that you have to have it appear. If it appears, there's no reason it has to be at full strength. If it's at full strength, there's no reason it has to choose to fight the characters. Maybe it goes after some other animal in the cave, and it's an opportunity for the player to save some other creature or animal. Maybe it runs. Maybe it's a good water weird. I don't know. You calling audibles, adjusting things on the fly, is one of the most powerful techniques a game master has available to them to make this a balanced encounter. Remember, your encounter is to challenge the players, not kill them. Your encounter is not your responsibility is not to trick the players. You're not there to fool the players. Aha, I got you now. That's not your job as a DM. You're there to provide a fun time for you as a player and them as a player, and create a challenge that they overcome and you enjoy playing as a DM. If you enjoy these really push to the wall encounters, then by all means do that. But realize, make a thoughtful choice that is what you're going to do. Don't just be a victim of what is written down in the counters and the stat blocks. Make a choice as a DM about how hard you want to make that encounter, with a mindfulness of what's the stakes for the players and what you're willing to do. One of the worst things you can do as a DM is present a challenging and deadly encounter that you let play out, and then you get a result you don't like and you start running it back. That is a way, way worse outcome for any game than just nerfing the encounter before it ever began, because it pulls back the curtain and it just says to the player, what they do doesn't matter. It's really all up to what the DM wanted to happen. And that's actually kind of true to a point, but you shouldn't break that illusion, first of all, and you shouldn't make that your go-to strategy as a DM. It's just not, that kind of fiat is a bad way to be running a game because it removes player agency, removes a sense of tension, and then they just run from encounter to encounter thinking, okay, well, what does the DM want to have happened here? That's not a fun game. So I really, really caution you to think about how far you're willing to go with an adventure, with an encounter. What do you want out of it? That's one of the things I actually put in my session notes. Where are we at? Session notes up here. One of the things that I do, this is an addition that I do over and above the Lazy DM preps, is I put, what do I want out of this individual session? And I've only got a few notes here, but I want to express how travel is much better now that the players have axe beaks. The first 3 levels have been about how difficult it's been to get around Icewind Dale. I want them to feel that sense of advancement by having axe beaks and knowing they can get around easier. So I want to express that through some encounters this time around. I also, and you can even see one of the other things I want out of this. This is not a complete set of notes. I'm still preparing it. But one of the other things I want is I want to add a small beat where the players feel their power difference. Because before, from first level and second level, every encounter was a struggle. Finding commoners was a struggle. It's all a struggle. Well, at the third level now, and I want them to feel that shift in power in their favor. So I'm going to have, if you're here for my last stream last week, I talked about random encounters. I'm going to have a tailored random encounter where they just run across a caravan that's obviously killed the people that they were escorting as part of their caravan just to take their stuff. It's intended to cause a small fight, but these are commoners. The players are going to chew through that caravan. And that's just me throwing something out for the players to realize, oh, wow, we are actually becoming good at this and we can tear through just regular people. So I want them to feel that sense of power. I haven't written the other bullets yet, but they're going to get to Easthaven. I want them to understand the context of Easthaven as it differs from Bryn Shander. It's still a good town, but one of the things that happens in the Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign is that each town has to do a sacrifice to the goddess Auril. I've set it up to have a little bit more context that they do a sacrifice once every new moon, to keep, or else she will visit a horrendous blizzard on the 10 towns that kills several people every time it's come. So if they do this sacrifice, they will avoid that blizzard. So it's a transactional way of dealing with the goddess. So anyway, in Bryn Shander, what's happened is they have to sacrifice a person, and that has happened by sort of older people or somebody who was willing to come forward and volunteer as tribute, basically, to be the one to sacrifice themselves that month for the sacrifice. I want to set the difference, how you can still have good people struggling with tough choices in Easthaven. In Easthaven, they sacrifice a prisoner every month. So there's the backstory of, well, do they trump up charges against somebody? No, I don't have them doing that, but maybe. But there's a lot of dissatisfaction, obviously, on this. And they always have someone in the can ready to go every month, a murderer, somebody who's done something horrific, where that's who they're sacrificing. And I want to contrast the personalities of these communities and the moral choices that they're making for the players to give something them to chew on, and actually for them to give something to react to make a statement from their character's point of view about what's their character's morality as it relates to this. Do they not care? Whatever. So I've strayed a little bit from balance, but that's one of the things I want to do. Once they get to that town, they're going to realize that there was another adventuring party and head out to this hag's cave. That's how the progression of that session is going to go, I feel. We might not even get to going to the cave next session. But it's what's in the cave that gravely concerning me as far as balance. So here, I talked about this water weird, a seemingly innocent encounter. But if you look at the mix of things that can go on to initiating that encounter, it can vary wildly. And so you need to prepare as a DM to turn the levers to the place that you want to have happen. I think what will happen if it was one player, I'm likely to make this an environmental challenge. I'm likely to say it's a half frozen water weird that has had part of its flake away. It's not as powerful, and it's just about challenging a single player. If it's all of them, I might have the ice crack and have it disappear below the water line with them. So we'll see where that goes. But those are the things that I'm imagining as a range of possibilities, which is another technique. As a DM, Don't say this is what it's going to be. Don't lock yourself into a choice. Think through this encounter and think through the range of possibilities and what might you turn if you were to modify this encounter in some way, shape, or form, and even just drop a note for yourself if you want. There's no good place to do this in this format, but you can do it potential scenes, and I like potential scenes down here. There's a section for it. That's part of the Lazy Dungeon Master Cauldron Caves, and just put a note for yourself. Water weird, could be damaged already. Ready or full strength, or make environmental challenge. So have falling pieces of ice, like have it freak out if the players and it tries to run. That's it. Actually, this is what I love about these streams. I have these ideas as they go along. So I love this idea of I love these YouTube videos where people run across an animal stuck against a tree and they free it, but obviously it's difficult because it's flailing around. The animal's afraid, so it might hurt them, and they do what they can to free it. So wouldn't it be cool have the water weird freaking out because it's trapped to some I don't know. Let's say it's trapped in the ceiling, and writhing around, causing ice to fall. I actually like this encounter better. I like this encounter better than straight up fight, because it's an area effect. It's essentially an environmental encounter, not a monster encounter. So they get there. This is like this water weird flailing around, half stuck in the ice in the ceiling, and that ice might break away when half breaks away. It can't get out, so it's just flailing back and forth. These icicles, these giant icicles, spear-sized icicles, falling down on a player, so they're making saving throws to duck out of the way. And what do? Do they take pity on this poor thing? It looks like it just wants to run. I'll really layer that. It just wants to get out of here. It's an elemental, so it's not inherently evil. So do the players decide, let's free the poor thing? Do they say, who cares? Let's just get out of here? That's an interesting role-playing choice by the party, and way more interesting since there's no real treasure here to get. It's a way more interesting sort of encounter because it gives them some choice. It lets them tell the game master who they are, and I'm kind of removing the balance concern here because I'm not causing the players to get into a single fight. Like they'll take some damage. At worst, they'll take some damage from the fall. They'll take a little bit of damage from the falling icicles, have a moment where they sort of run to the side and dive out of the way, and that's sort of it. But they can, I like that. It'll cost the players potentially some resources, won't kill them, and won't set the stage for a terribly difficult encounter. All right, so let's go back to the journal, though. Well, let me do it from the D&D Beyond, which I love. I love D&D Beyond. No support for this stream. I'm not selling anything. I'm here to talk about D&D, and I love it, and I love the comments so far. All right, so let's go over to Rime and the Frostmaiden and look at this encounter as it relates to Easthaven. So there are the big encounters to worry about, and we're going to take up the whole hour on this, where I'm not going to get to a lot of session prep. And maybe I'll get an idea. If you have an idea or suggestion, please make it in the stream, because I'm about to show you what my main bugaboo is about this adventure, and that is this encounter in U9 and this encounter in U10. U9 and U10 have, that's the map. Don't need that. U9 and U10, first of all, it's important to realize these are connected areas separated by 30 feet. If you have a fight in one, first of all, I'll get to there's a hag and a will-o'-the-wisp in U10. If you get in a fight here, the hag has already said it calls the frost giant skeleton that is in U9. If you're in U9 and you start this instead, let's say you fell down here and you found this little entrance, the frost giant fight starts. There's no way in heaven or earth this hag would not hear it. And that's they don't acknowledge that in the module, and they should say something about it. What does the hag do? Does the hag join the fight? Does it hide, hoping that the fight it doesn't want to be bothered with? I don't know, but they don't say. And you should, as a DM though, decide what you want the hag to do. So look at the ossuary. So this giant frost skeleton that comes out after the players, and this is going back to the balance considerations I said early. Here I'm very concerned about. So the giant this Frost Giant. It has multi-attack at a +9 to hit, and it does average damage, 25 hit points a strike. Let's go back to this table. They're a third level party. That is more hit points in a single strike than one player has. 25% of the third level characters, more hit points than they have. Half of for third level characters. This is a CR. This is designed for third level characters, by the way. Half of the third level characters have 24 or below hit points. 75% or more have 30 hit points or more. So what this encounter is doing, it's a CR6 encounter, which is bananas for a third level party. 25 hit points, over half of the characters it can take out in a single shot. And with a +9 to hit, it is very likely to do that. That is without even its freezing stare capability, which I will get to in a second. So you already have this creature able to make 2 attacks a round against 4 player characters that half of them, most of them, it will take out in a single shot. This is not a well-balanced encounter. And it has 102 hit points. So the damage output of the party has to be, on average, it'll take out a party with a +9. It'll take out a party in about 3 rounds. Full party, third level characters, if it goes 3 full rounds, maybe 2, it will take out 3 characters. It will take out an entire 4 to 5 person party of third level characters. Can the party do 102 points of damage in 3 rounds? I do not think so. So this is just not a great module. So I know they know this when they designed it, because part of the write-up is that it's frozen in ice and it takes 2 rounds to get out. So the players have 2 rounds to start attacking it. That's a big assumption. The players might choose to run, at which point it chases them, and at which point, what does that really gain the party? I mean, if the party chooses to run out of this entire cavern and exit, it follows them to the exit and just kind of stands there. But are they going to give up on the adventure? I don't think so. So they're going to probably go back in, at which point they don't have those 2 rounds of attacking. So even with 2 rounds of attacking, let's say they can do 45 points of damage. That's still 60 points of damage. This is an incredibly difficult encounter given just the great axe damage. And that is not all it gets. The skeleton can target 1 creature it can see within 60 feet. It succeeds on a con save or takes 35 points of cold damage and be paralyzed until the next turn. This is just a poorly designed. So here's my thing. I don't actually have an idea yet. I'm still working on it. I would love to hear from you. What can I do about this encounter? What I want out of it, that's a good thing to do as a DM. Sit back, ask yourself as a dungeon master, what do I want out of this encounter? Well, what I want is this to take time and cost a little bit more damage. I don't want to be a burst damage. So let's talk about burst damage again. What's the type of damage that this can do in a maximum strike? So if it does a critical and lands its damage on a player, it's 6d12. Oh my gosh. It can kill in a single critical strike any third level character. Not quite any, but so here, maximum hit points of 75% of third level characters, 30 hit points or above. If it can do more than 60 points of damage in a single strike, it can kill a third level character outright, force the DM to a position of, oh, well, no, I didn't want that to happen, or I'm changing the rules, or I'm saving you. I mean, I don't know. This is a real sign of a bad encounter. Bad. I'm trying to stay away from that word. It's a good module. I'm not trying to give that. It's not the kind of encounter I want to run. I don't want to be stuck either in the position of magically saving and saying the critical damage rules don't apply and pulling the veil back from the players. And I don't want to be in the position of just, letting them burn through this. So I'm still sort of thinking on ways to, and I'll tell you what techniques I use in a second. So I'm still thinking ways to make this. So the way I typically use it is I put in, typically balance it, is I tend to leave the stats close to what they are in the book, but I add some external factor that I want to make a part of this, that the players can modify this situation more. So some kind of power source that they can take out that's giving this creature its abilities. Like I might half the hit points of a technique might be something like half the hit points of the giant. Give it some kind of magic item that radiates a resistance to all damage, so it has the full hit points. But if the players and give the players some way and clue to take out this item, drops the resistance of the creature, and now they can do, they take it out much faster. That lets them earn something. It lets them feel smart for figuring out. That's one technique to do. The other is give it some tactical disadvantage, a pit it can fall into. Its movement is 40 feet. They're not outrunning this thing. So, and what is immunities? It's vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. So that you can give it, this actually for my party works well because the one character just loves bludgeoning damage. So it does have that factor in it, but it's still not enough to undo all of this world of hurt it can visit. And this is not even really what we're the only concern, because as we said up earlier, this cave here, there's a hag sitting in it. There's a hag who's only CR2 for some reason. There's a CR6 frost giant and a CR2 hag, which is not really that hard for a player. But a CR2 hag has this ability, and with a will-o'-the-wisp. So there's a sea hag and a will-o'-the-wisp. The sea hag itself, special ability, CR2 creature, 52 points of damage. It's unlikely the players will take it out in the single round, but certainly in 2 rounds they'll burn through this thing. It's Death Glare, the ability. It's a DC 11 Wisdom save. Not that great, but it's a targets one frightened creature she can see within 30 feet of her. If it must succeed on a DC 11 Wisdom saving throw or drop to 0 hit points. Now this is unlikely because this illusionary appearance. If it drops the illusion, there's the D16, or there's some kind of save, a horrific appearance. That's it. DC 11 wisdom save. On a failed roll, I think this is the area effect. They become frightened. So this is the area effect. Once that happens, they have to succeed on a DC 11 wisdom save if she uses that ability to drop to 0 hit points. Now that's actually balance-wise. You have to realize this is the equivalent of rolling with advantage because they have to fail a chain of saving throws and not very high. So this is not very likely, but again, we're sort of talking about the same thing as crit damage and the swinginess of D&D. So let's say they fail both of these. Someone goes to 0 hit points. The will-o'-the-wisp special ability is that it can use an action to consume life, as a bonus action. Oh my God, as a bonus action, not even as an action. Consume life. The will-o'-the-wisp can target one creature it can see within 5 feet. If it has 0 hit points and is still alive, the target must succeed on a DC 10 Constitution save against the magic or it dies. Period. It dies. And the will-o'-the-wisp heals. That is that's a chain of failure that it just ends up in this place no DM wants. What's the outcome for the DM? There's 2 missed things in balance here. One, again, it's an edge case. They'd have to fail 2 DC 11 wisdom saves, and then they would have to fail a DC 10 Constitution save. So that's a mitigating factor for DM. Unlikely to happen, but still possible. Especially since games, you don't know where they're going to go. Players can split up. They can run all over. Someone gets frightened and they choose to role play that they run as hard as they can. Maybe they run towards that frost giant. Maybe they run all in different directions. I don't know. So the amount that you can control this sort of begins to reduce over time, and you get a less of a good handle on it. So the ultimate place this can go, there are too many places within this module that a bad set of rolls, or bad single roll, just results in the death of a player without recourse. Worse, it's a missed opportunity for the DM to set the stakes. They don't know until they've been hit then that frost giant is capable of killing them in a single blow. They don't know, or they might know depending on the player. They don't know that there's this chain of events from the hag on through the will-o'-the-wisp that it can consume their life and kill them like that with a saving throw, but with no recourse really. So what's the point? What's the utility of that as a game master? If you have these tense, dangerous elements within the mix of the game, you really should, as I said at the top of the stream, work to put that on the table and let the players know, hey, this is a real possibility. You could be dying here because of these factors. There's no good way to do that without, sort of reducing into a sort of just an explanation of the rules. But I will give you a technique I use it. I would use it in the description. You see floating into the room a glowing ball of energy that you know to be a will of the wisp. Nim, I'll point to the wizard. You know, these things consume souls. If people are knocked out, they're immediately able to consume their soul. It kills them immediately without recourse, and it heals the will of the wisp. And you feel its malevolent energy wanting to draw the life from you, and how it almost looks at you with a hunger. Something like that. Set the stage in those ways. Do it. Same thing with the Frost Giant. Frost Giant emerges from the ice, which explodes into shatter around the entire cavern. You're aware of its raw power and majesty, and you're confident that if it hits you, it has the full capability of cleaving you in half. So step with caution. Say something like that. So set the stage, not mechanically, but set the stage as part of the narrative and give them what to worry about. So all of these, and that's if that chain of events caused by the monsters. There's other things. I mean, again, it's right next to the player's location. I won't get to the map again. It's right next to the player's location. So if they have this giant epic fight with this frost giant and it falls, and they go into the next room 20 feet away and they have everybody there acting like they didn't know anything was happening, that would just be illusion shattering. So let's say the players in the midst of the fight with the frost giant, the hag is likely to send over the will o' the wisp. Some game masters may choose to do that, or they may just fall to 0 hit points for other reasons. So those are very cautious monsters you want to add, because now you've painted yourself into a corner as a DM. And you're forced to tell the players, I'm no actual threat to you, or I'm sorry if something just doesn't go wrong. If the dice roll up bad, you're just dead. And that might be your point of view, but you should be cautious about it if you're going to take that position as a DM. All right. So what I think I'm going to do is this whole additional add of why I want that frost giant combat to play out. By the way, I also added an item which is a shield that belonged to the grandparents of a player character in here that can do this thunder wave ability. Actually, that's how it's going to break out of the ice. It's going to be embedded in the ice. There's this old story of them fighting a hag with a frost giant companion. This is going to be the undead version of that now. They're going to see it embedded in ice with the shield. You see these glowing eyes that sort of lock on the player character when she gets close to it, because you'll see the shield in there. The shield begins to reverberate, the ice begins to shake, and it explodes outward as the shield activates its ability, basically. So that I want that to play out, that it has a shield, and I don't want to just do this like just burn rate on party hit points where it just goes down. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to see where the giant is at the end of its 2 rounds of getting out of the ice. If the players have whittled it down, really done all their blunt damage that they can, realize that it's vulnerable to bludgeoning damage, maybe I'll just and it has like 1 round left. I'll probably give it the one swing of its multi attack to see if it can really cut into some other players. If not, I'm going to give it another objective, which is it'll recognize the paladin player character. It will want to use this thunder wave ability to show it off. Like it'll just slam it down into the ice, and you'll see the players that get knocked around, they take like 2d8 worth of damage. It's a great effect, but what the players won't know is that's a lot less damage than swinging its great axe, and it's a single action. So it'll do that to sort of set the stage and the value of the magic item, let the players be knocked around the chamber a little bit, but it won't have it swinging the axe the entire time. So it'll give them a few rounds to whittle it down. When it looks like it's in trouble, it'll take a shot or two with the great axe and really do some damage to the players, probably. But I'm not going to make that the main feature of this encounter. So I'm going to put that in my notes. So encounter frost giant skeleton, add shield, break out of the ice. make encounter about use. I can't spell anything I'm today. Using the shield to set up how cool it is only turn to attacks toward before it falls, shortly before it falls. And then if the fight goes that way anyway, I mean, the difficulty for this setup is if the players instead, and this is the more likely case, if the players instead go through the hag's cave, she calls the giant and the giant comes striding out. I can still have it do it, but it won't have the effect of busting out of the ice. So I'll just have to describe them as hearing it. What do I do for the hag? I'm not that concerned about the hag fight. Again, it's a CR2 creature with a CR3 Will-o'-the-Wisp. I think the parties will burn through that even if they're exhausted a little bit from the Frost Giant fight. What I want out of the hag encounter is for them to see how malicious she is and recover this device. So, I don't really care. There's I think I'll leave that encounter sort of as it is. I'll give that description I said at the top just a moment ago about I'll set the stage that the Will-o'-the-Wisp has this power to use. So yeah, that's what I'll do there. All right, we're reaching the end of our hour, and we didn't get into session design so much as theory crafting, but I hope that was useful to you a little bit. I mean, there's a lot that goes into these encounters that you really have to look at to try to balance. But the sin of our current module design, and if you look at Rime of the Frostmaiden, there's a lot of encounters like this where you look at it and you realize the burst damage from this thing could very well outright kill player characters. And that persists through levels 7, 8, 9. I mean, you see this, there's some crazy there's some crazy encounter later where one room has an Elder Remoraz and then the next room has 2 Elder Remoraz, which is bananas. But I mean, that's just, you have to think through these encounters, give yourselves a couple of options and ask yourself as the DM, do I have to be aware of a burst damage situation or a chained failure situation that will kill the players without recourse? Because that's no fun. If it is, how can I set this up so it's more interesting than just taking player characters out in a fight? I talked about Sefik Kaltro in that encounter last time. It was a boring game for that player who went down in the first encounter because they were out the rest of the combat more or less, and they would have been, and it was an hour-long battle. That's a long time to sit, especially if you're virtual tabletop, you're sitting online. That's a long time to listen to other people play. No fun for anybody. So I don't think that's a great design thing. So here's another technique you can give. On the back end, so that's all on the front end. How do you keep the players from getting into this situation in the first place? On the back end, you can have a couple of trade-offs with yourself as the DM. And actually, I fell down on this. I didn't do a good job with my own DMing technique on this. What I said is I gave the players a chance to wake up that unconscious character with some DC 20 medicine roll just out of the gate. And what I mean by that is it worked out well. It maintained the tension. It worked out well, but usually what I do is I actually negotiate. I give the players something, but I ask for something from them in return. And I actually prefer if the players are the ones that come up with this idea. So what I wish I had done in retrospect is said something like, listen, if you're willing, if the down player is willing to automatically fail their next death save, I'll give you the opportunity for a player to make a medicine check to wake you up with 1 hit point right now. So they would never get that failed save if they succeeded, obviously. But that's a nice trade-off. It raises the stakes over and above. So they're paying in, they're anteing up something into this prospect for the benefit that they wouldn't normally get, and you're not modifying the rules to modify the rest of the game. Those tend to be like, oh, the players have some agency now, even when they're unconscious. I think that's a super powerful technique for a DM, and I encourage you to think about these things as well. So if we get into this situation, I might do things like, if the player fails a Will-o'-the-Wisp roll, maybe they'll, and dying, I might give them some option to take a stat loss. I don't know. That's like a bad idea. I have to think about it. I might give them some option to get their soul back from the will of the wisp, and do something like that. I'll have to come up with some idea. If you have one, please leave it in the comments. I would love to hear your idea. But that's a great GMing technique. I think can be really valuable. Okay, that's it. We've done our hour, a little bit over. I'm sorry, I ran about 4 minutes over. Yeah, I think this is going to be a great. So that's my challenge in this encounter. These balancing range of options that I need. Talking this out has been very helpful for me. I hope you're able to think through your own game and what you have to look at for to understand what balancing, what levels and levers and knobs you need to put in as a GM to start to think about turning. How you decide on, you look at things critically to decide if you need these things in the first place. That's what I was doing here, and it's very needed in this next encounter, which I think is going to be a great encounter. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you will take the time to leave a comment or leave a like or subscribe. Please, again, this is the new channel. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter. Engage me on Twitter. I love to talk with people on Twitter as well. So go ahead, leave like, subscribe, comment, do all the social media things. It would really, really, really be appreciated, and I would love it if you did that. Go ahead and leave a comment down on the tavern wall below. It would be great to hear about what you think of this stream, any of the topics, spawn some thought of your own. What would you do in these situations? I would love to hear from you. All right, so thank you very much for participating this week. It's been great to talk to you. I will be back next week, as usual, to talk about more D&D Rime of the Frostmaiden prep and tell you how this whole thing went. Hopefully, I won't have killed the party. So thank you very much again for joining me. I really appreciate it. Give me a like, subscribe, and follow. And remember, until next week, remember that fun is not optional. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.